This is where we left off. I talked about John Watson the other day and told you a story about him. It was kind of unethical. What you need to know is that none of us are perfect, right? So, and neither anybody who writes about this in psychology. So let's talk a little bit more about the history of psychology. And we'll start off talking once again about Sigmund Freud. These three forces, they call them forces in psychology, are the most current, up-to-date ways we look at how people got to be who they are. They're the dominant theories that are there. One is called psychodynamic. When I did the historical part of it, I called it psychoanalytic. Nowadays, they just call it psychodynamic. And it's developed by Freud. Still, we talk about Freud, where behavior is directed by forces within one's personality, which are often hidden or unconscious, that are there. Okay. So, the same thing. We're still thinking about what happened in your childhood, okay, has an influence on who you are today. And Sigmund Freud was the first one. You're confused? Well, not now, because it's over with.
I said yes to the wrong one.
Okay, so somebody else got credit for it, all right? Well, just see me after class. That person who wasn't here just got credit, okay? All right. Excuse me?
Psychoanalysis was Freud?
Yes. Yeah, that's when he first wrote it in the 1920s, 30s. They called it psychoanalysis. Now they call it, since I'm doing psychology today, they call it psychodynamic. It's the same thing. Okay, it's the same thing. You'll never see the difference on the test. Okay? Behaviorism, we know from the other day that John Watson was the first one that started it. And actually, we don't use Watson's name anymore, but we use B.F. Skinner's name. Okay? Which again, behavior is shaped and controlled by one's environment. That's the conditioning that went on when you were younger that make you who you are. Same thing, still very, very important. That's there. But then we add another force in psychology that we haven't talked about, and this is called humanism. Humanism was developed in the 1950s and 60s by a man by the name of Carl Rogers, where he says behavior is guided by one's own self-image. So where behaviorism say we're just being conditioned, Rogers says it's really about how we perceive the world and what your thoughts are. And you're a unique individual. See, this is where the humanists come in. They say we are all unique individuals and we all have a subjective perception of the world. And we have this real need to improve ourselves and be the best that we can. He also says that it's the first person to come along and say that, you can choose to be who you want to be. You have free will. Skinner and Watson for behaviorism said, no, you're just conditioned to be. Just like any other little dog or monkey, we can train you to be who you are. Rogers didn't say that. Rogers said, no. We're all unique and get this, really good people. We're born good. The behavior said we're born neutral and our environment acts on us. But Rogers was much more positive. He said you all can strive and to reach your fullest potential and be whoever you want to be. Very, very positive. Recognize that he wrote also around the same time when we had what? Civil rights in the 1960s, women's rights in the 1960s, where all of a sudden people said, no, this is wrong, what's going on here. I can change myself and be whoever I want to be. Well, that's what humanism is, okay? The ability to say at any time in your life that you can change.
Can we change?
Can you change? I think you can. Now, I'm going to answer that because that's a good question. Can you change? I told you I was a therapist for a lot of years, so if someone came to me and said, forget about it, you won't change, I won't be doing my job. But I don't think people change drastically, okay? I think people modify the way they think, feel, and behave over their lives. I think what happened to you as a child and your personality that got formulated as a child is pretty well set, but you modify it as the years go on. know thyself. You ready? You need to know who you are, know thyself. You need to learn to accept yourself. And then you want to wind up just being yourself. Do you understand that? That's the basis of psychology if you want to learn anything else about yourself. It's figure out who you are, okay? And then what you want to do is accept that and then be that way for the rest of your life. Because if we're all unique individuals, okay, then we need to embrace our uniqueness that's there. So a good part of our lives is trying to learn who I am, accepting that, and then being comfortable being that person. Therefore, yes, do you change? No. What you really do is you modify, but you really want to just accept who you are. Okay? So can people change? By the way, I hope you never marry anybody and go, you know, he's great or she's good, but I'll help them change. Nah, that's not going to happen. You're not going to help them change, okay? It's, let me figure out who you are, and if I really like you for who you really are, then hopefully you may modify this as you begin to accept yourself more. As parents and members of society and culture, we should be helping people try to figure out who they are so they can accept themselves. When you read that book, The Other Westmore, that talks a lot about fate and along the road and what happens to you. So it's about trying to accept yourself.
Like, is there any steps to find yourself, like find who you are?
Well, I think so. I think it's a reflection. Look in the mirror. Try to figure out who you are. Take personality tests. Go over to the career center and figure out, it'll reflect back to you who you are. Ask your friends. Ask your parents. Ask your lovers. That's not easy for us to do, though, is it? Because someone says, well, you know, you're a jerk. Well, you need to accept that, too, because maybe you are, and try to change that. So you try to take a hard look at yourself. There are so many different books that are out there that says, discover yourself. We can start asking those questions of yourself. Yeah? I'd start first just by sitting down and writing down on a piece of paper, who am I? I am. And then ask your friends, am I really this way? Ask your parents, are you married? Okay, ask your husband that. Ask whoever that, and get some information about yourself.
I know it's difficult to, like, when somebody asks who you are to define yourself, is difficult.
Oh, it's very difficult, yeah. In fact, I don't even know if I figured out who I was until my 30s. So that was a long time. But, you know, as I started developing, going through my life, it's kind of like I think I'm this and think I'm that. Isn't that what adolescence is about? You're trying to figure out who you are, and you have different friends and groups, and people reflect back to you about who you are. It's tough in adolescence to try to do that, but we have a whole chapter on that when I talk about Erickson in about 2 weeks about doing that, and I'll answer that some more. Okay? Good question. All right, so humanism. I like humanism because it says we all have a chance. Okay? The other people, Freud basically said, you know, however you were treated as a child, you're just stuck that way, and that's the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. Okay? Skinner said, you know, however you've been conditioned, it's hard to change conditioning. But humanism comes along and says, no, man, everybody can really change and reach your fullest potential. That's the key word, reaching your fullest potential. All right, there are two other theories today that are also very popular. One is called psychobiological, and I don't have a name for you, so there isn't one person who has written a lot about this. And what this says is that we are who we are because we're human, and animal behavior is the result of internal physical, chemical, and biological processes. It's your brain that makes you who you are. Everybody has a little different brain, and it's the chemical and neurological processes that go on that have an influence on how you got to be who you are. All right, so they emphasize more of the biology on that. And then the last one that's popular today was developed by Ellis, and it's called the cognitive approach, where much human behavior can be understood in terms of mental processing, which basically says that what you think is who you are. Change the way you think, and you'll change the way you feel and behave. It's all about this massive brain that we have up here and the way we perceive the world and ourselves. So that's a different view, and it's very different than Skinner and Watson and Freud. So those are the big 5 theories that we have today, and probably the most popular theories to answer the question, how did we get to be who we are? Okay? How did we get to be who we are? In psychology, as I mentioned last week, okay, the psychobiological approach is becoming much more interesting, because we're beginning to find out we can peek into your brains as you think and as you do things and actually see how your brain works. And people who are very emotional people have very well developed parts of their brains that are emotional, okay, that develop emotions and make you feel. Those of you who are very analytical and very rational and you don't pay much attention to your feelings, we can peek in your brain and see those parts of your brains seem to be more developed than other parts of the brain. We can peek into schizophrenics' brains and see that their structure in their brain, how their brain works, is very different than non-schizophrenics' brains. So what we're beginning to see is that the brain has a lot to do with who you are. Just as a point of reference, just as an opinion question, this is not for a point, there's no right or wrong answer, but what is the most valid explanation of human behavior? Out of all those 5 theories I just gave you, which one do you think is the most valid? This is just your opinion. I guess I could also ask it as, which one do you like the most? All right, just to review for you, psychodynamic would be Freud, right? Behaviorism would be Skinner and Watson. Humanism would be Rogers. Psychobiology, I don't have a name for you. And cognitive would be Ellis. Which one what? Which one would I choose? I'd probably choose 6, all of the above. But by the way, a lot of my questions are that way, because I think really all of the above is the right one, but I want you to think about it. I like humanism most. It just appeals to me that we get a choice of being who we want to be. The more I study the brain, though, the more I think, boy, there's a lot to the biological part that's there. And I'm going to explain, the next thing I'm going to explain to you is my view. Okay? Thank you for asking. All right, so what do we have? Most of you think humanism. Okay? Hopefully you didn't do that just because I just said it, but yeah, humanism, behaviorism, psychodynamic, not that important. But most people do. I mean, that seems to be the most positive, doesn't it, for all of us. Here's a question for 1 point. Ready? See if you were listening. This is called an application question. When I put questions up on here, one, I want to see if you're listening. 2, you could get a point if you get it right. 3, I also want to teach you how to take multiple choice questions, because a lot of people just don't know how to do this. This is called an application question. It's a situation in which Taylor believes his behavior is guided by his own self-image and that he has the power to control his own fate and reach his full potential. He has adopted which psychological perspective? So you can look at your notes, you can think about it. Now, when you take a multiple choice question, you should be looking for key words. What would be the key words in this question? Self-image, right? What? Control his own fate? Has a choice? Right? Now, sometimes when you study information, I didn't put the word choice in here, did I? But that word choice I talked about with one specific perspective. So when you do a multiple choice question, you want to look what the key words are. And those key words should automatically get you thinking about certain answers. Because when you study for the exam, you should be saying humanism. What is humanism? It's developed by Rogers, where people have free will, they can develop their greatest potential, they have a choice to do different things. All right, so when I put that in my brain, then I look at these questions Okay, then all of a sudden I can go, boom, that's the answer right there, because I've already matched up information. Taking multiple choice questions is a lot about just matching up to key terms. Boy, I sure hope you all got this one right, because I just gave it away. Everybody got this one? Come on. Answers in. Okay, that's it. All right, 95% of you correct. Right, it's humanism. Right? Own self-image, has a choice, guided by his own fate, reaches its fullest potential. Now, let me also say, every once in a while I might put one of these questions on your test. So when you see these questions up, you might want to write down the answers, okay, and study for it, because it may show up on your test. All right. Now what I want to do, I want to answer his question, and his question was, what is my view on psychology? Okay? What is my view on how people got to be who you are? This is what I think it is. I'm going to call it biopsychosocial. Your textbook now is beginning to use this term in some of the chapters. What is biopsychosocial? It's an interactive approach that emphasizes the relationships of each one of these: biology, psychology, and sociology. Each section has an influence on each other, so we say they are interdependent. You cannot separate the influence. How did you get to be who you are? It's about your brain, neurochemistry, genetics, which then influences your perception of yourself, psychology, and then the environment. Remember the other day we talked about socioeconomic levels, religion, that's all the sociology part that's there. So how did you get to be who you are? It's all three, and you can't change them. Your brain is genetically predisposed to think a certain way, behave a certain way, and then the environment, sociology, can actually change the structure in the brain. The more you do something environmentally, okay, it's going to change those neurons. The more you do something, the more you think about something. Some of you think about things a lot, and you think about things. Some of you are chronic worriers. You worry about a lot of things. And what has wound up happening is that psychologically, the middle part, psych, you started thinking about, I don't know if I can do this class very well. I'm not sure. This guy goes awful fast. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this class. I hope I do. I'm not sure about that. And then once you start worrying about that, then automatically your brain has been wired to start worrying, because you've been worrying all your life, and then that worry about the class then becomes, gee, but I want to get in the nursing program. If I can't do this class, I may not get to be in the nursing program, then what am I going to do? But I think I was getting married, and the reason why I was getting married, because I thought I'd have a good job in nursing, now I shouldn't get married. And before you know it, your brain has all of these little neurological connections going on, which equal to what? Worry. And then the more you worry, the more these neurons begin to bloom and develop more neurons. So pretty soon you have this huge circuit in your brain that's called the worry circuit. And what winds up happening is that you get outside, you get on LBJ, and there's a lot of cars, and you say, oh my gosh, I hope I don't get into an accident. Why did you just think that? Well, because you've got a worry network going on there. Now, you could change that by saying something like, Steve Link just talked about this. I'm on LBJ, quit worrying, stop it, don't worry about that. And then you don't. And then all of a sudden, if you do that over and over again, those neurons that used to be used for worrying are going to split off and start being used someplace else. So anything that you do, behavior, think, or feel has a neurological connection for it. The more you do it, the more the neurological connection.
Is that what you think, that negative thoughts bring negative actions?
Negative thoughts bring negative actions. Why? Because you're wiring your brain to that.
It's already connected to your head.
It's already connected, and the more you do it, the worse it gets. You do that with thinking that's there. This is a good class, by the way. You're asking a lot of questions. Okay? You have thinking, but the same thing with behaviors. if you're a tennis player and you're constantly doing this over and over again, and you're doing it the correct way over and over again, your brain gets wired and you don't even think about it anymore. It becomes a habit. That's easy to explain, but people don't realize how thoughts do the same thing. Your brain gets wired that way. And that's why it's difficult to change. Okay? And you got to be able to consciously start doing it, but the beauty of this is it's interactive. It's interactive. Do one, then the other one changes. So let me explain this in a little more succinct way. When we talk about biology and how we got to be who you are, we're talking about genetics. We did this the other day. I said that some of you, we know that some people are predisposed to being shy, that there's actually a genetic predisposition to being shy. Some of you were born shy. That's the biology part that's there. Therefore, what happens when you got around a lot of people, you began to get a little nervous. The anxiety then reinforced the neurological connections. Then you began to say to yourself, oh, I'm kind of shy. I don't like being around a lot of people. That's the psychology part. And then when you interacted with the environment and someone said, how are you? You went, oh, fine. Okay? Then people then said to you, oh, that person's shy. That's your environment. Which then what? Reinforced your thinking, which then reinforced the neurological connections. So we see genetics. We know that alcoholism runs in families. Okay, so your dad might have been an alcoholic. You have a genetic predisposition to it. Watch out. But you say, I'm never going to be like my dad. I hate it when my dad came home drunk and he yelled at everybody and said, I'll never do that. You may not be an alcoholic, but you may have a genetic predisposition towards drug abuse. So your drug of choice may not be alcohol, but it may be marijuana. Okay? So you sit around getting high going, I'm glad I'm not like my dad. Okay? But yeah, you are, just you use a different drug. Genetic predispositions, alcoholism, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, being happy. I mean, all of that could be genetically predisposed. The next one down is neurochemistry. Your brain is full of neurochemicals, okay? And these neurochemicals make you think and feel and behave in certain ways. Some of you are naturally happy. You get up every morning and you get up and you go, it's cold today. I like the cold. It feels good. This is good. I mean, you're just happy all the time. It's kind of like, why are you so happy? It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's cold out. And you're like, oh, things are good. You may have an overabundance of the availability of a neurochemical called serotonin. Serotonin is considered to be the happy chemical. So when people have an overabundance of the availability, key word is availability of serotonin, they have a tendency to be happy. They're just happy. Okay? Those of you who got up this morning and went, it's cold again. I don't think it's ever going to get warm. I hate the cold. And you came to class like, is he talking about me? Maybe you don't have high levels of serotonin. And you may have what's called a propensity towards a chemical depression. You get depressed real quick. Maybe because you don't have a lot of available serotonin. That's there. When someone gives you an antidepressant, the main neurochemical it works on is serotonin. It increases the availability of serotonin. So it lifts you up. It lifts your mood up because it keeps the serotonin available. That's there. Some people, by the way, may just naturally have, through genetics, have a neurochemical imbalance and have a tendency towards depression, and they may have to be on an antidepressant for their whole life just so they get that balanced. I'm sorry. Now, the general world, though, says, oh, you're on an antidepressant. Why can't you control it yourself? Well, your brain's not working right. Right? So let's give you a medication. If it helps, use it. We don't go up to someone who's a type 1 diabetic, who's not producing any insulin whatsoever, and say to them, don't go on your insulin. Get off of that stuff. Why can't you control that yourself? Use your brain to do that. Well, their pancreas isn't working well. So it's the same thing for some people who may have chemical depression or bipolar. People who are bipolar got to stay on their medication. It helps them. Schizophrenics got to stay on their medication. These are disorders of the brain, disorders of neurochemical imbalances. And I can go through a whole list of other neurochemicals that we'll talk about as the semester goes on. But that could have an influence on you. 3, your brain structure may have an influence on you. I've already said that a schizophrenic's brain structure is different than a non-schizophrenic's. Those of you who are extremely emotional, we can probably look in your brain and see really thick, wired brain neurology connections with you in the emotional parts of your brain. That's there. So brain structure may have it. Now also remember, okay, that environmental influences can also build up that brain structure, change it, reduce it, or anything else. Hormones have an effect on how you think, feel, and behave. Right, women? Oh, no. Okay? Estrogen, progesterone levels, right? Some of you get very anxious. Some get depressed as your hormones begin to change. Some have no reaction. It does have an influence in how you think and feel and behave. We know that, but did you know that men also have an influence of what's called testosterone that may also change how they think, feel, and behave? Okay? When testosterone levels are high, their sex drive becomes higher. They also become more aggressive and have a tendency not to pay attention as well either. Right, guys? You don't even know this, right? Right? We don't know. We generally look at women on a 28-day cycle, give and take, X number of days. For men, it's kind of like 4 to 6 weeks. We really don't know the exact numbers with that as well. But it is there. So this weekend, women, if you're out with some guy and he's getting a little, should we say, rambunctious with you, okay, just kind of pushing on you a little bit, what you could do is, I don't know if you want to hug him because he might think of that as something else, but you might want to at least tap him on the shoulder and say to him, I understand it's your time of your cycle right now, and I need to be a little more understanding of you. Hormones, right? And later on when we do chapter 2, I'll talk about other hormones that affect how you think, feel, and behave. Exercise. People don't realize this, but exercise influences how you think, feel, and behave. One of the number 1 treatments for people who are depressed is get them to exercise. Get them active. What does active do? It changes the neurochemicals in your brain. Your brain goes, well, what's going on here? We're working out. Well, I guess I need to release, boom, these types of hormones or neurochemicals to give you energy. But how do you convince someone who's depressed, let's go exercise? You're right. I don't want to do anything. I'm going to go out and run or something. Okay, but it does work. Okay, nutrition also has an effect on how you think, feel, and behave. There are certain psychiatrists in this town that don't use what's called psychopharmaceuticals. What they do is that they prescribe different types of foods. Let's change your diet, and that may change how you think and feel. We also know that when people get depressed, some people do, when some people get depressed, some people begin to look for what's called comfort foods. Okay? Going to eat some ice cream, some potatoes, mashed potatoes, pasta, cakes, cookies. Those are called what? Simple carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates, when it's taken into your system, converted into amino acids, and when it gets into the brain, it's converted into a neurochemical called serotonin. So when you're eating that bowl of mashed potatoes, all of a sudden you go, God, I feel better. Why do you feel better? Because you get a rush of serotonin that's there. That's one of the reasons why we call it comfort foods. It makes you feel better. Because when it gets out of your system, then you feel bad again, and then you eat pasta. I don't know, and then you're 590 pounds after a while. Okay? But they're simple carbohydrates. And so nutrition affects how you think, feel, and behave. You're learning something today? It's not only about what your mother said to you when you were 6 years old. It can be a lot about biology. All right, the psychological part of all this has to do with conditioning. B.F. Skinner and Watson You did X, somebody reinforced it, therefore you kept doing that. So conditioning, modeling. A lot of times parents say, do what I say, not as I do. Children don't do that. What children do as your parents do, not as they say. Children model, right? They watch their parents all the time. There are things that you will say to your children, and as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you'll go, oh, don't say that. That's exactly what my mother said. Okay? I have a tendency when I walk that I'll put my hands in my pocket like this, and I'll walk like this. When my children were about 3 and 5, I